own lives to make a positive difference. We are having a little bit of technical challenges trying to get somebody still in the room, so I will be working on that. But before we do that, I do want to quickly welcome the Freedom Riders, but also say a huge thank you to our sponsors. We have a huge group of community sponsors from Weston, Easton, and Reading who have really gone out of their way to promote this event. A couple of sponsors who have donated to make this event possible. Just really thrilled to have the sponsorship, the support to make sure this event happens. And now I wanted to introduce Representative Ann Hughes to say a big thank you and introduce Wiley and the Freedom Riders.
Thank you so much, Devin. I am thrilled to be co-hosting with an intergenerational panel of folks in this historic moment. I'm State Representative Ann Hughes. I'm so proud of my district, Easton, Weston, and Reading, for coming together and really highlighting the importance of this moment and the legacy of history that we're living in. And I'm just so honored and humbled that we get to welcome 3 living legends, Freedom Riders. I'm really excited that we get to welcome 2 moderators, including a student moderator, and the person that sort of made all this possible, our very own Wiley Mullins, who's really been behind the scenes and has cultivated these longstanding relationships with the movement, with the civil rights movement, and has championed really what that looks like, what civil rights looks like today in our communities in this era. So Wiley, tell us why you get to be the one that brings us all together.
Thank you, Ann. I've got to tell you, this is so exciting because it really does show progress. And several years ago, I had the distinct pleasure of getting to know 2 of the people very well that you're going to hear from tonight. My good friends, Joan Browning and Dion Diamond. And I've just recently become acquainted with Mr. Charles Person. And I had a wonderful conversation with him earlier, and I read about his story and the ride that he was on. And so I know that you're going to be very excited to hear from him. I first became acquainted with Joan and Dion and the late Reverend Reginald Green, who passed away exactly 1 month ago, 1 year ago this month. And I hosted them in my hometown in Alabama to a standing room only crowd. And we later went on from there down to the University of Alabama, where I'm a graduate from. But it was also the school that Governor Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door prohibiting Vivian Malone from entering school. And we had a great response down at the University of Alabama. And we thought that this would be a wonderful way to kick off Black History Month 2021 in the Easton, Weston, and Reading area. And I know that there are a lot of people in other places across our great state that are tuning in tonight. So that is wonderful. And we welcome you as well as others from all over. We welcome all of our guests. I'd like to share with you just a few tidbits about our panelists individually. I'll start with my good friend, Joan Browning. I always love getting cards from Joan. I get cards from her throughout the year, and it's always a good day for Miss Joan to send me a card, and it always puts a smile on my face. But I was so excited when I first learned of Joan and her story. Joan was a student at a college, an all-white women's college in Georgia. But she attended an African-American church, and she was a scholarship student and was told that if she did not stop attending that church, that she would lose her scholarship. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm not going to get any more into her story because I want her to tell it to you. So I want to just welcome her tonight. She currently lives in West Virginia. And Miss Joan, it's great to see you. and thank you for being here. And Dion Diamond, Mr. Diamond resides in Washington, D.C. He has an amazing story. He was a student at Howard University and left Howard on one of the early rides going into the South, into Mississippi. And not only he will tell you about the times that he was arrested and the work that he did in Mississippi. In fact, he never returned to Howard University, I don't think. He later went on to continue his education in the Midwest and also at Harvard University. And I'm sure he'll tell you about that. And Mr. Persons, Charles Persons, I just met via phone and now via Zoom, and it's great to hear him. His story is just so amazing. He's a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, the college where Dr. King is also a graduate. And he was on one of the very, very early rides going into my home area, Birmingham, that area. And his story was just amazing because I personally could visualize that taking place in Birmingham. And so I can't wait to hear his story. And we welcome you, Mr. Persons, and thank you for joining us. And he currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia. So with that, I'm going to say, why don't we get started? And Miss Joan, we'll start with you. If you'll share your story, that would be great.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having us back. Dion, we must be doing something right because you had us in January 2015 and you had us in January 2017. So now here we are again. I do want to remember our friend Reginald Green, who was with us the other 2 times we were here. And I'd like to read a little piece that I think sums him up very well in his own words. And it's written by Nancy Doniger, and it's called Ordinary People Who Changed the World. Thank you, Nancy, for writing this up so that we have a memory of that. If you'll bear with me, let me tell you about Reginald Green. Green interrupted his divinity studies to get involved in the civil rights movement and was arrested multiple times. Quote, "I was just a young man from the southwest of Washington who decided one day to get on a bus and ride through the South," he said. The Freedom Riders' visit came as President Donald Trump issued his executive order closing the nation's borders to people from a list of predominantly Muslim countries. Quote, "Now we're on a precipice and being challenged and could lose the things that make us free," Green said. Quote, "The message to young people at a time such as this is figuratively to get on the bus, fight injustice, stand up for those coming in, since we are a nation of immigrants. So much sacrifice has been made and so many have given their lives to fight for human rights. The only ones who didn't come as immigrants are Native Americans," Green said. As an African-American youngster, Green could not attend Washington's public schools. Quote, "Even though there were no signs as in the South that said colored and white, there were certain boundaries and things we couldn't do," he said. "I think of how many times I climbed the Capitol steps, knowing they were made by the hands of African-American slaves who labored and built those steps and helped build those buildings. It reminds me how we need to continue to do those things God has called us to do." After completing military reserve training, he attended Virginia University in Richmond, Virginia at a time when student sit-ins and protest movements had begun. Then on May 14th, 1961, his life took a new direction after a Trailways bus carrying Freedom Riders burst into flames. On that day, 7 Black and 6 white Freedom Riders had left Washington, D.C. on 2 public buses bound for the Deep South. They intended to test whether the southern states would enforce the 1960 Supreme Court ruling that declared segregation unconstitutional in interstate bus and rail stations. Quote, "As a result of that image of the bus exploding, 3 of us decided to join the Freedom Riders," Green said. "We knew the risk was great, but we got on the bus and went to Jackson, Mississippi. After the bus reached its destination, Green spent 29 days in jail. Following his release, he met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta. Quote, "If I'm preparing for ministry eventually, I couldn't talk about ministry without knowing that I should be involved," Green said. "If we walk together, we can get to the promised land." Green went on to earn a Master of Divinity degree and served for 40 years as the pastor of Walker Memorial Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. He preached on Sunday morning 2 sermons at Covenant Church during their stay here. The congregation was moved many to tears by his sermon and the spirit he has about him, Slater, the Covenant Church pastor, said. So that is my friend and our friend, Reginald Green, who left us last February. But he was with us twice in Connecticut, and I wanted to remember that, and I'm just happy to meet Nancy and say thank you for this wonderful write-up that you did about us. Now, I've taken up some time. Why don't we go to the others, and I'll come back to talking about a little white girl on a freedom ride after Dion and Charles have told you about themselves.
That sounds good. So why don't we go to Dion, because he was here the last time. I'm Nancy Doniger. Some of you knew me from the old Courier, and now we have a new Easton Courier. The old one closed, but we started a new one. So it's still the same paper, but it's online and it's nonprofit now. And I am the executive editor. And I'm just so happy to see you and Dion again and to have the opportunity to meet Charles. I was so honored 4 years ago to meet you, and now that you're back, it's wonderful. So why don't you tell us something about yourself, Dion?
Hello to all. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. Nevertheless, this technical difficulty is my being so ignorant as to how to use a computer, and also because I don't know how to hook up with Zoom. I'm, as said, Dion Diamond. I'm a native of Petersburg, Virginia. At the time that I lived there for the first 18 years, I lived in a totally segregated town. And I guess before the Freedom Ride, I started my own personal sit-in. I would go into the local 5 and dime store and go to the white-only lunch counter, only to be told that I couldn't be served. And I would sit. And they would call the manager, and I still sat, and they would call the police. And I never knew that I could be so fleet of foot as I ran out the back door of the place to avoid the arrest. At any rate, I matriculated at Howard University in Washington, D.C. when I graduated from high school. And let me tell you, the sit-ins, this was 1959. In 1960, when the, I guess I would say when the sit-ins started, we tried to figure out, we were at Howard University, supposedly the epitome, the capstone of Negro education. Now, I mean, I know Wiley might argue with that one because he went to, because of Morehouse having the reputation that it has. But nevertheless, when the sit-in started, D.C. was not a legally segregated town, but nevertheless, it was segregated. But across the river in Virginia, that whole state was a segregated entity. So several of us said, well, if we aren't having any sit-ins in D.C., perhaps we can go over into Virginia and do some sit-ins at segregated counters. Well, after a very short period of having sit-ins at the lunch counters in Arlington, Virginia, the entire area desegregated within a 2-week period of time. And of course, we were, all public accommodations were desegregated very quickly. We were so enthused at how easily we won that battle, we figured, wow, what can we do next? across the river again, there was an amusement park called Glen Echo, and it was all white. Now, what I think I can only say is that for that entire summer, we had sit-ins and actually a picket line all around the park. Well, here's one anecdote I'd like to share with you before getting to the Freedom Ride. There was a completely complete assistance we got from a white community that was made up of people who were high in the labor union, and they came out and supported us. Well, here's this one. We got a Cadillac limousine. I put on African garb, a white chauffeur in uniform, and a white female interpreter. We pull up in front of the amusement park. The chauffeur gets out, opens the door for me to get out in my African garb, and the interpreter gets out, and I scream. We try to walk into the park. They refuse to let us in, and I scream in my pidgin French, "Je veux rentrer le parc maintenant." And I was trying to say, I want to enter the park now. Nevertheless, it made the newspaper, so we got a lot of publicity out of that. And that was our foray into Maryland. Now, on May 24th of 1961, I left school thinking I was going to be gone on a long weekend. That long weekend lasted 2 years and 3 months. That was the bus that went into Jackson, Mississippi from Montgomery. And I don't know how many of you have seen the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, but that ride between Montgomery, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi, we had National Guardsmen, I should say Alabama Guardsmen on the bus with us. Cops in a helicopter overhead, the state police of Alabama. And then when we got to the Mississippi state line, on either side of the state line, there were state police and troopers. I used to say that I felt safe with the troopers and the National Guard. Little did I realize at the time that those were the same guys who either were members of the Klan or new guys, or they hung out with members of the Klan. We pulled into Jackson, Mississippi with, again, helicopters flying overhead. And I don't know how this occurred, but as soon as we got to Jackson, we were arrested. Now, once again, following segregation, we were segregated by both race and gender. So we never knew exactly who was arrested. When the jails were filled, they moved us to the county prison farm. From the prison farm, they moved us to the state penitentiary. Now, what you have to understand about this is we couldn't understand why we were being moved so frequently. Little do we realize that, hey, we were filling the jails because we had no communication. So we didn't know that the people kept coming, they ran out of space, and that's why we were being moved. And I don't know, it's as I think about it today, people ask me, would I do it again? Well, back then, I called it youthful, now you can see, youthful enthusiasm is what I called it, because I was a student, I was a kid, I had no responsibilities, I had no kids, I had no house note, so I assure you, if I had to figure out if I could do it again, I'm not certain. But at any rate, that was my introduction. For the next 2 years, I became a field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee called SNCC, doing voter registration in Mississippi, sit-ins in Cambridge, Maryland, and we were trying to, I will leave with the following. Southern University is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And the president of the school, after the kids there were involved in sit-ins, closed the school. And I said, well, wait a minute. We can go over to Baton Rouge and get some of the kids who are not in classes suspended, get them to come back to Mississippi to do voter registration. Well, to make it short, I got there and tried to enroll the kids. And as soon as I had a bus lined up for kids to go to Mississippi, the guy reopened the school. So my purpose in being there was stifled. I got arrested for trying to, well, they said I was trying to inciting to riot. And I was charged with 7 different things: vagrancy, trespassing, disorderly conduct. But the top one was I was charged with criminal anarchy. They said that I was trying to overthrow the government of the state of Louisiana. Well, in fact, now that I think about it, I was guilty of that. I mean, if the state had laws that said segregation is legal, that's what I was trying to overthrow. At any rate, that case went through the court system, and it was tossed out. I'm in school in Wisconsin. I had to go back to serve the time. I'm taking up too much time. Look, I'm laughing because of my stint in jail in Louisiana was such that they told the prisoners, if the other cellmates, if they roughed me up, they could get time off for good behavior. Only a couple of people in there knew what I was in for, and I was protected. But as I say, I'm very pleased with my participation, and if there are any questions that come up in the course of this meeting, I'll be more than happy to respond.
Thank you very much. And maybe in the course of this too, I understand that you and Joan are kind of good buddies, and you just have a good time together too, joking around a lot. So, all right, now I would love to hear Charles' story. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go back and have more of a conversation. So why don't you tell us about your involvement?
Good evening, everyone. Well, my involvement started in Atlanta. I had problems getting to the school I wanted to attend. I wanted to attend Georgia Tech, but they didn't want me, even though I had been accepted at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So I opted to go to Morehouse, and there was a great time because the students were involved in the sit-ins. And I was involved in the sit-ins, in the marches, in the boycott. And I was arrested in February of 1961. And I spent 10 days in solitary confinement for singing too loud. Upon the successful completion of the Atlanta movement, the Congress for Racial Equality realized that there were a lot of students who were trained in nonviolence, so they issued a request for persons to participate in the freedom rides. Well, no one knew what a freedom ride was back in those days, but at that time I would have volunteered to go anywhere, anytime to fight segregation. So I applied and I was accepted. For many years, I didn't understand why they chose me, but CORE was very meticulous. They wanted people who had no negatives in their background, because in those days, if there was anything negative about you, it was exploited. If you were a socialist, if you were a communist, if you were a homosexual, it was all these things that it could try to use against us. So CORE wanted to make sure that we were all squeaky clean. And my ride started in May 4th, 1961, after 3 days of advanced training in nonviolence. And that was really interesting because we all had experience in nonviolence, but CORE wanted to make sure that we were not going to be violent regardless of the circumstance. In other words, if you're confronting someone, you can deal with it. But if someone came up from behind or from the side and inadvertently attack you, many times that human reflex would have kicked in. And they wanted to make sure on no circumstances were you going to be violent. And I can say that throughout the rides, we did, all of us, maintain that discipline. And we know how, and we knew how to conduct nonviolent protests. And we had no instance where people involved of our choosing were involved in any acts of violence. But our ride was well planned, and we in the upper part of the ride, we had little or no problems. The first incident we had some kind of problem was in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they wanted to arrest me for trying to get my shoes shined. Well, that was not one of our tests. But the thing is, when you've been riding a bus and your shoes get all scuffed up and things, you know, you wanted to get them clean. One of the things you can remember about us, most of the time the boys wore shirt and tie and the girls wore Sunday best. We were disciplined, and that was a part of the discipline, is to be, we were well groomed. So everything would have fine until we got to Rock Hill, South Carolina. When we got there, Congressman, well, John Lewis at the time and Albert Bigelow, they were attacked, they were beaten pretty badly. But when the police came in and wanted to ask John and says, "Do you want to press charges?" John said, "We're not about punishing people, we're about the system of segregation." The next day we entered Georgia, and we had a planned dinner and meeting with Dr. King. So we got into Atlanta, they allowed us to eat and drink in the restaurant. Everything was fine, beautiful. We had a meeting with Dr. King, and we had hoped that he might join us. He did not want to join us, but he wanted us. He says, "I understand that terrible things await you in Alabama." Now, we respected Dr. King, but we had a job to do. And the next day was Mother's Day, beautiful day. We left Atlanta. The Greyhound bus left about 2 hours ahead of our bus. And we had no problems until we got to the Georgia-Alabama line. When we got there, a gentleman was getting off the bus, and he says to me, because my seat was right as you come in on the bus, and he says to me, "You niggers have had it good here in Georgia, but you're in Alabama now." Well, I looked at him, being my youthfulness. I'm saying, "Well, you know, you're getting off the bus." Little did I know that 2 hours later, I would see him again under different circumstances. So we relaxed and we got into Anderson, Alabama. And for some reason, the bus station was closed. Our driver gets out and he talks to some people. And he comes back and he says, "I understand the Greyhound bus has been set afire and they're taking the people to the hospital by the carloads." Now, we knew that those were our friends on that bus, but we had no way of knowing, you know, how bad they were or what the circumstances were. But what we later found out was when it got to the station, men laid down in front of the bus, other men punctured the tires, and eventually the bus left the station. It gets out a few miles out of town on Highway 202, and the tires went flat in front of this grocery store. The driver gets out, he locks the door, and he goes and confers. Well, in the meantime, someone breaks the window, throws in a firebomb, and the bus starts to burn. The Freedom Riders couldn't get off the bus. So finally, after some time, there was an explosion, I guess, a gas tank, and the door blew open. And the men came out the door, and the women went out the back side of the bus. When they exited the bus, many of the men were hit with baseball bats. Policeman on the scene, he fired 2 rounds in the air, and he said, "Okay, you've had your fun," and he stopped it. Ambulances came to take the Freedom Riders to the hospital, but the ambulance would not take the Black Freedom Riders. So the white Freedom Riders says, "Well, if you're not going to take them, then we're not going either." So rather than have a bigger mess, they finally got everybody to the hospital. Now this crowd, on this Mother's Day crowd coming from church, followed them to the hospital and threatened to burn the hospital down. So one of the Freedom Riders, one of the core members, called Reverend Shuttlesworth in Birmingham and explained to him what had happened and that needed help and come rescue them. Well, back on our bus, the bus driver gets on the bus and says, "I'm not moving this bus to the blacks to get to the back of the bus." Well, we weren't going to move. So 8 men got on the bus and they started punching me and Herman and trying to force us towards the back of the bus. When we got midway of the bus, Uh, Dr. Bergman, who was the oldest Freedom Rider, and James Peck came to our rescue. Now that really irritated them to think that white men would come to rescue these Black kids. Dr. Bergman, they knocked to the floor of the bus and they began to stomp him in his chest. And had his wife not implored, they probably would have killed him there. James Peck was a bleeder. So when James got knocked to the floor of the bus, his blood covered the floor of the bus. So here's the situation you have. They're forcing Herman and I and other students towards the back. We're stumbling over Dr. Bergman. We're slipping on James's blood. And it was just a mess. Eventually, they got us to the back of the bus and they physically threw us to the back of the bus. One eyewitness says they stacked us like pancakes. Now, once they were satisfied that we were in the back, and they sat midway of the bus and they taunted us all the way into Birmingham. Now, we took it in an alternate route into Birmingham because the bus driver had been warned that a mob awaited our bus. Now, had our bus been firebombed, I don't know if we would have had the strength to get off the bus. So it's a good thing that we did take an alternate route, but it took us 2 hours. And if you ever made that trip, you know it's not 2 hours from Anderson to Birmingham. Well, we get into Birmingham. James Peck and I, we were the designated testers. Now, he was badly beaten, he was bleeding and all that, but he wanted to go. And so I said, let's go. Well, we went into the waiting room and the entire wall of men came towards us. James went down almost immediately. And I guess my being younger, I was able to maintain my balance. But I was in the center of this group of men, and there was one photo was taken. It's the only photograph that survived Birmingham. And in this photo, when the photo was taken, it startled them and they all look up and they turned me loose. And I just simply walked away. I didn't run, I didn't cover up anything. I walked away, but they turned on the photographer, they beat him up, they destroyed his camera, and they thought they had destroyed all the film. But one film pack did survive, and that's the one, that's the only evidence of what happened in Birmingham. And I left, I walked out to the street, and as luck would have it, a bus was coming, city bus. I get on and I says, take me somewhere. And the driver drove about 2 blocks. He says, if you get off here, if you go across the tracks, there'll be someone there to help you. Well, in the rural South, Black folks always lived across the tracks. And the reason for that is that in those days, trains burned coal. Coal produces soot, which is a black powdery substance that seemingly gets on everything. So I get across the tracks and I find a phone booth. That's the precursor of the cell phone. And I was able to take my trusty Dion and I called Reverend Shuttlesworth and I told him what had happened, that I was alone and what had happened to us. He sent 3 of his deacons to rescue me. And once they saw all the blood and stuff, they said, well, you need to see a doctor. Well, there were 3 Black doctors in Birmingham and all 3 refused to treat me. So they took me back to the church because there was a nurse there and she put a special bandage on my head, which kind of pulled my scalp together. That was fine. That was the only treatment I got. However, as time went by, I developed a knot where the wound had drained to the base of my skull. And I developed a knot about the size of my fist. And I was reluctant to have it checked out until the advent of the MRI, where we could take a look and see what was in there, because I really thought that I had a knife blade or ice pick broken off in my skull. But once we realized that what had happened, there was a drainage point from that initial wound, and I had it removed from a great plastic surgeon in 1996. And well, now most of my wounds from the civil rights movement have healed, and sometimes I forget about them. Even the doctors have reminded me that there is some residual damage, and I won't deal with that unless I have to. But the Freedom Rides, we met that night and we discussed we're going to continue the rides. But the next day, no one would take us out of Birmingham. So we decided to fly to New Orleans. And we get to the airport and we get on the plane and there's a bomb threat. And we get off the plane and they check it out. We get back on the plane, there's another bomb threat. And things were beginning to get scary because the same crowd that was at the bus station had followed us to the airport. But with the help of Mr. Siegenthaler, who was an aide of the Kennedy administration, he expedited our flight out of Birmingham, and we eventually ended in New Orleans. We had a great rally, and it was to come celebrate the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. That's why we chose today, May 17th. But I think that the freedom rides were important, and it was one of the first major campaigns where, in the end, when the edict was passed, it affected every state in the union. And that was a good thing, because you didn't have to replicate in each state like we had to do with the sit-ins, because it took a lot of resources and a lot of time. But the Freedom Riders proved that you can do these things and it can be successful.
Thank you very much. So you both really, I mean, all three of you gave up a lot and really were at great risk, but you did what you believed in. And norms were different then, even some of the terminology that we don't use anymore, you know, like the Negroes as opposed to Black people, you know, things like that, that, you know, norms have changed. Even some of the requirements for core, you know, today, you know, people have different rights. Also the, you know, the lesbian, gay, you know, we don't refer to people as homosexuals anymore. And that would not be a reason, I would hope, in today's world not to be able to participate. So things have changed. But what would be your advice for people who are, young people who are wanting to change things today? Because our world is very divided, and a lot has changed, but a lot is still pretty tough in this country, as we've seen with some of the incidents last summer and whatnot. And what would be your advice to the young people today? And let's go back to Joan, and just if you could just give us a fairly short some advice for the young people in terms of sticking with it and sticking with your beliefs, even though it's hard.
One of the things that I tell young audiences when I speak with them today is I quote a minister in Philadelphia who his church every spring had to celebrate the accomplishments of students, and they would award the students various things and make a big deal about them. And then one year he strode up to the pulpit and he started this sermon something like this. Young people, you think you're never going to die, but you are. One of these days, we're going to take you out to the cemetery and bury you, and we're going to come back to the church basement and we're going to talk about you over potato salad. What you're doing now is deciding what we're going to say when we talk about you over potato salad. Are we going to say, "Why, she really, really dressed well," or "Boy, he drove fast cars"? Or we're going to say that your life made a difference? And that seems to startle young people into thinking that they are making a record of their life. They're making a history of their life. And we don't know how long it is. So do the thing that you want to do now. And in honor of Wiley Mullins, I want to quote what Thurgood Marshall said to Arthurine Lucy. Arthurine Lucy was a young woman. We didn't come out of nowhere. We came out of a long history of resistance to segregation. And one of the people who resisted was a young woman named Arthurine Lucy, who got admitted to the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa and to study as a graduate student in library science. And I remember her because yesterday is the anniversary of when she enrolled at the University of Alabama, and then was threatened, her life was threatened, and she was expelled. Her attorney for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and later U.S. Supreme Court Justice was Thurgood Marshall, and he wrote to her, "Whatever happens in the future, remember for all concerned that your contribution has been made toward equal justice for all Americans, and you have done everything in your power to bring it about. And I think that's the legacy that we tried to accomplish. We would do what we could where we were to bring about justice for all. And what a meaningful way to live life.
Thank you. And now, Dion, would you give us some words from your perspective? You were a very young person when you got involved, and what words would you like to give to Jasper, who is with us now, and he is a student. He's a junior in high school, and he is on the Diversity, Equity, Education, and Advisory Committee. Did I get that right? Maybe not quite right.
More or less.
In Weston. And so when you're making your statements, you know, they can be directed at people like Jasper and his generation of young people. So Dion, what would be your words for Jasper and his generation? Do we have Dion?
He's muted.
Yeah.
There you
go. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Excellent. Okay.
I find it difficult to figure out what to tell the younger generation, other than going through the historical progression of. People wonder why I think sometimes we're schizoid. In my 79 years of life, I have been described as being colored, then I was described as being Negro, then I was described as being African American, then I was being described as being Black. With all of those possibilities, I sometimes have to wonder. Now, when I say evolutionary, if you look at what happened back in the 40s, when the veterans came back from the war after having seen other societies and how Black people or people of color were treated, when they came home, they were treated just as if they were at the bottom of the totem pole. They also recognized that in World War II, we had some prisoner of war camps in the South with Germans being imprisoned. They were only imprisoned for sleeping purposes. They walked the streets, they got haircuts, they could eat in restaurants. Then the sit-ins came about. Look, we need each generation to take the torch just a wee bit further. So to you, Jasper, I would say, look, where we are today is not where we always were. I think it's out of the 12th Night from Shakespeare that says, what is past is prologue. If you don't know your history, it's going to come back and bite you. So to you, I would say, hey, look, because you look at race relations today, don't think that we have made it to the promised land. You've got to carry the torch again and take it down the road a wee bit more. So I would say to you, please don't forget where the history of this country is. Please keep trying to get equal rights for all of us. That's about it.
And Charles, some words for Jasper and his generation?
Well, Jasper, change generally begins with young people. Young people are impatient. We old people, we tend to rationalize things and let things continue to fester. You can change the world. You have the ability, and your group have the ability to change the world. Also, you must remember, when you, as a leader of Black Lives Matter or any other group, you must define who you are, and you must define your mission. People need to know what you're about. And I think it's one of the things that made us successful. When we had a demonstration, we got people together, we said, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Everybody knew what was going on. So, and also, we had discipline within our group. We never had violence emanate from our group. And we did it because we had monitors and we had other means of control so that our people would not get out. Nobody could hijack our movement. We have to be concerned about numbers, but you also have to be concerned about safety, because first of all, that is your community. And you know, if it's burned and destroyed, you've got to live among that. And if you think back to the violence in LA and some other cities, it took years and years and years to repair those places. And you have to live, and your kids have to live in there under those circumstances. So the idea is that you can work today collaboratively with police and first responders to have a peaceful, nonviolent demonstration. See, we didn't have that problem. The problem we had is the police in most cases was, you know, the first responders and police were the ones inflicting much of the violence on us. So you don't have that as a problem now. So you can work with these organizations to have a First Amendment rights protest that could be nonviolent and it could be peaceful. But the main thing is that know who your people are. And also, if you are a leader of a movement, you are responsible for those people. You know, if you take them downtown, you make sure they get back from downtown. We would never disband our group in a downtown area. We march to where we're gonna go, and we march them back to where we assembled initially so that everybody can go home safely. And when you don't do that, when people are dispersed, they can be picked off and strange things can happen, especially at night. Another thing, we never did anything at night because under the cover of darkness, the bad guys can come out. And we didn't want that to happen, not only to our people, but to anyone, our citizens. But we just wanted to let them know that these are also, we also articulate our demands. Everyone should know why you're protesting. And if you know, you can either have it right in the manifesto, any way you choose to do it, but people need to know why you're doing what you're doing.
I actually wanted to ask, because I don't want to say it's less clear, but racism is less obvious in America today, right? You don't have the, you know, whites only signs up anymore. So in today's world, how does an organizer more effectively recruit people when the message is less clear and the goals are more broad?
In my experience, we had a wonderful a mentor named Miss Ella Baker, who'd been at social justice work since 1912 or something. And she believed that the way you organize is the issues come from the people. You don't come in and say, I'm going to organize, you know, on this issue. You go in and live with the people. And that's how we did in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And the people will tell you what the issue is. For example, when I first came to West Virginia, I came to organize handicraft co-ops. And I was tootling around rural West Virginia. And I got to this community and they said, we don't have time to bother with that. There's this bridge that our school bus goes over and it's endangering our children. So, okay, let's forget handicraft co-ops and work on the bridge. That's what that community was concerned about. And once they saw that they could work together and get a safer bridge, then we could talk about raising their incomes through handicrafts. But the community decides what the issues are, and they're different in every community. I like the fact that Black Lives Matter is decentralized into local communities because the issues are, there are some constants like police brutality and murder by police, but there's some issues that people recognize as more immediate in their immediate area. What you find in Weston may not be what you find in the neighboring county. So we organized around what people, we were there to serve the people. We knew how to write grants and we knew how to write press releases and, you know, things like that. And we were there to put our skills to work for the people. And they decided what the issues were, and they decided who the leaders were.
Yeah, right.
You know, the leaders came out of the community too. That was Miss Baker's philosophy. She said, strong people don't need strong leaders. And so, you know, and in terms of the freedom rides, I was on the very last freedom ride. And we knew what happened to Charles and to other people and to Dion. And so we were wide-eyed about this. We were not daydreaming that we were just going to walk in and they put us up in the Holiday Inn. We knew what the odds were, you know. But it was something that I think when we get to reunions, we all agree we just had to do it. It was just so wrong that we couldn't sit back and wait for somebody else to take care of it. We had to be the ones to give it a try.
I have an observation, if I may throw it in at this point.
Go ahead.
We'd love that.
Charles was speaking about the training that he got at regarding nonviolence. I'm sorry to keep using I, but nevertheless, we found safety in numbers. I never had any training in nonviolence. I considered nonviolence as being either a tactic or a philosophy. I didn't think of it in terms of anything other than a tactic. I assure you, anytime I went on a sit-in or any type of demonstration, I promised myself that I would be nonviolent as a tactic. We had no guns. We had no baseball bats. To me, it was a tactic. Now, if I were alone, I am not a nonviolent person. If you strike me, I'm going to strike back. But nevertheless, again, when we were in any type of demonstration, I was indeed nonviolent. I've been smacked. I've been kicked. I've been hit with a Coca-Cola bottle, and I was nonviolent. But let me walk alone and let someone attack me. I assure you, I'm going to fight back. I know that's different from what you heard from my two compatriots in terms of nonviolence, but that's just the way I am. And of course, at 79 years of age, I have to be nonviolent.
I see a question coming in here, and Nancy, I don't know if you can see them on the live questions. I see Gavin Guerra is asking about the tension between the direct nonviolent actions or the direct actions of the civil rights movement and the voting drives and the voting rights, and mentioning Ella Baker. Can you speak to that, any of the panelists?
I'm familiar with Ms. Baker's philosophy, and I must admit, I was a devout follower, but I'm not capable of really, I didn't have that much personal one-on-one contact with Ms. Baker. I just knew of her influence, and believe me, it's a great influence she had on all of us, a great lady. But I really don't. In fact, even with Dr. King, to me, I listened to a philosophy and I understood the worth of it in terms, again, as a tactic. I don't know if that responds to your question, but that's about it.
Thank you, Dion.
I probably knew Miss Baker.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Of the three of us, I probably knew Miss Baker best. She actually raised some money for a scholarship to try to help me finish my degree when I got kicked out of school. I don't know that she believed in nonviolence. She believed in our deciding for ourselves what to do. I grew up in the Methodist Church and down in the country, and nonviolence came natural to me and still does. And Dion is right. We didn't have the guns anyway, so if we wanted to be violent, we'd just be mowed down in a minute. We only had, the willingness to put our bodies out and take whatever abuse we took. And some people were murdered, and some people like Charles had wounds that lasted all their lives, and almost all of us have post-traumatic stress disorder in one form or another out of all of that. Remember the Arab Spring a few years back? When Arab Spring happened, Julian Bond and some of us were so excited because we thought they were copying what we did. And here they were doing it in a new way with new technology and a way of organizing using all this stuff that Dion and I are having trouble with. And they were put down so quickly. So it was really disappointed, and we tried to figure out why. And Charles, it's because we knew each other. We were committed to each other. When we sat down to go on the Albany Freedom Ride, we said, okay, here's how we're going to operate. Nobody's getting out of jail until everybody's out of jail. We're staying nonviolent, and we have one person who speaks for us, and the rest of us are just refer all questions to Jim Foreman. So we had these strategies and ways that we operated, and we were committed to each other. I mean, I would have died for the other Freedom Riders, and they would have died for me. So the Arab Spring didn't seem to have that because they had organized on the internet and they didn't really know each other. So when they wind up down here, and I mean, thousands of them in the getting fired on by guns, they don't even know who they are. So you know,
that togetherness, that we, that as opposed to I, that Dion was talking about, really was a major factor. And Charles, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, one of the, you know, I was Joe was easy. My bus came along and I got on, but the issues today are a lot more complex. And the bus may not be a physical bus, it may be a metaphysical bus. But regardless, you have to make a decision, or you're going to work to make life better and make America better. But one of the things I like to share with the devotion that Freedom Riders had for each other. The oldest Freedom Rider on our bus was Dr. Bergman. And at 18, he just seemed ancient. You know, 60 years old, when you're 18, seems like an old person. But what happened?
Amen.
What happened when we were attacked on the bus in Anniston? Dr. Bergman came to our aid. Now, he had promised that he was going to take care of me, and he tried, and he got beaten mercifully. But then again, when we got to Birmingham, and this is the story I learned later, is that when he realized that James Peck and I were in trouble, he came towards us. Somehow he was knocked down, and he managed to crawl on his hands and knees to try to rescue us. Now, here is a 61-year-old man that's trying to rescue a young 18-year-old. You know, I can't imagine, you know, that's the kind of devotion we had for one another. To this day, I'm just marvel at the determination and the love we had for each other. And, you know, the bonding it started then, even exists to today. And you know, I have this kind of connection with Freedom Riders throughout the country because they're very special people. And I think once you get to know them, you'll love them just like I do.
Wow, that's great. I have a question, and this is for Joan. Joan, I think a lot of the audience is wondering, you are a white woman. It's obvious when you look at Charles and Dion, they're both African-American men, and why they were fighting so hard for this. But you were in college, you were on scholarship. What drove you to take action like this?
well, I grew up in deep southern Georgia in a very white place and a very racist place near some of the Talmadges, the worst family of politicians in anywhere, as bad as George Wallace. And like Charles, you know, Sputnik went into space when I was a teenager, and I wanted to use my math abilities to meet those old Russians. They beat us in space. Charles, Georgia Tech wouldn't let me come either.
Yeah.
They only let white boys come to Georgia Tech then. So I went to where I had a scholarship, and I was really doing well. I had finished part of my junior year by the time I was 18. But I didn't like the huge white Methodist church with 1,000 members. And I met this 11-year-old girl when I would go to this urban swamp and read. And she introduced me to her father, who invited me to his church. And I liked his church much better. But the president of the college, Dr. Robert E. Lee, called me in one morning and said, I have anonymous phone calls that they're going to burn the church if you keep going there, and they're going to hurt you and the college. So I set out trying to figure out what's wrong with going to church. And I met Reverend Jim Lawson, who was the guru of nonviolent civil disobedience. And so I had training from the very guru of the whole movement. And then I was ready when I went to Atlanta and was invited to be in part of sit-ins and picket lines and various demonstrations because I had that training. And then I found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they had organized this freedom ride. And they needed another white person. They wanted to be Jim Foreman, our boss, was sort of a historian, and he said, this is probably going to be the last freedom ride, so let's take a train in honor of Homer Plessy in 1896 in New Orleans, who had started the whole separate but equal thing in America. And so I was the right color and willing, and had been trained in nonviolence, and so that's how I got to be a freedom rider. Wally, people say, what drove you to do this for Black folks? And I said, I didn't do it for Black people. I got kicked out of college because I didn't know what was wrong with going to the wrong church. I did it for myself because, as Dr. King says, as long as one of us is not free, none of us is free. And I wanted to play with people like Dion and Charles. You know, there's cream of the crop of my generation, and Julian Bond, if you knew Julian Bond, you know, it was just stupid. I couldn't go have a cup of coffee with Julian anywhere in Atlanta I wanted to.
Right. You know, it's interesting because Reading, Easton, and Weston are suburban towns, affluent towns. And just down the street is one of the poorest cities on the East Coast, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. What would you say to the residents of Easton, Reading, and Weston who are privileged to have great schools, clean streets, quiet communities? What action would you say to them to help those who are not necessarily privileged to enjoy those things?
When we were there last, we went out to, we were sponsored in part by the Bridgeport Public Education folks and the Child Advocacy Coalition. And we went out to a high school and met with 3 or 4 different collections of students. Some of those students, and those were students who had not had the most advantageous educations or home lives. But when talking with them, they had dreams and they had skills and abilities. And, you know, until we figure out everything, we need all those skills. We don't know who can figure out COVID. You know, we don't know. Some student, like I was in South Georgia, might be the one to use the math skills to figure out some complex space problem, or Charles might, or Dion might. You know, so until we have solved the problems of the world, we can't discard any potential people who might solve it. And they, so I, just like I went into the civil rights movement because my world was limited by segregation. We're all limited by not taking advantage of all the skills and all the resources and developing all the children into the best they can be. Some of them might invent something that Dion and I can figure out how to Zoom better. You know, obviously we haven't, so it's not doing something for the less advantaged. It's doing something that's good for all of us. It's just good for all of us.
Well, you know, Ms. Joan,
Go ahead.
Ms. Joan, I am so reminded on your last visit here, I think you weren't feeling well that morning, but Reverend Green and Dion and I, we went to, I think you went to Bassick High School in Bridgeport, and you went to Central High School in Bridgeport. And then later we went to Darien High School, and a stark difference, just an absolute stark difference. And yet those kids are all asked to compete in the same world. And I guess, you know, I think about it. How do we make things fair so people have chances that they can succeed? How do we do that?
Education. For example, when I was going to school, the Atlanta Public School was preparing us for failure. And why I say failure, We never had new textbooks. We always, they had hand-me-downs. Many times you had books that were missing pages or pages that are stuck together. So you evaluate your educational system and see what's provided. Sometimes the resources, the latest computers, the latest software goes to the more affluent schools. So yeah, kids are learning, but they are always behind. They're always trying to catch up. And I think that once you evaluate your school system, you'll find that you'll develop the skills, and also you develop people to help these communities lift themselves up. Um, I have one thing I've learned as an old man is that uh, the way I was taught about the Civil War and all those things were all disconnected. I mean, once I learned about the Indian removal and how it ties in with slavery and how that ties in with the manifest destiny and how the Spanish American War, all these things all tying together, but what they're taught as modules in school, and we don't connect the dots. But we realize that once you look at this thing all together, then you see how we get the America we have today and how the people involved have suffered. And once we make that acknowledgement, when we realize that, hey, some people suffered that I may prosper, then maybe we can look at realigning some things, realigning some priorities, and then everybody can succeed. Because in America, there's no reason why anyone should fail. I mean, really, think about it. Whenever there's a hurricane or a tornado tears up the community, what do? We all get down and we get it done. We get it repaired. We work together. Why can't we do this every day? If we did this every day, there would be no problems in America. We would have nobody suffering. No one would be left behind. But we are interconnected and interdependent. And we must realize this, that, hey, I didn't do this by myself. I'm standing on somebody's shoulders. Someone paved the way for me. And my job is to pay back for the benefits and the things that I enjoy today. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
You sound just like John Lewis now. I don't mean to be sanguine, but over the years, I've come to believe that this whole thing is based on socioeconomic factors. Everyone, or no one likes to feel as if they're at the bottom of the heap. We've got, problems within each ethnic group. Everyone wants to think that they are better than, well, not everyone. The people at the bottom socially and economically don't like their position, and they must feel as if they are either equal to or better than anyone else. And that's the way it should be, I suppose, except one thing. You can take a person with a great deal of education, but if you put them in the wrong situation, somebody, irrespective as to their educational level, is going to look down on them because they don't want to feel as if they're at the bottom of the heap. I'm not certain if I'm making any sense. I don't know how it's going to be resolved. Charles, you say if we work together in the emergencies, why can't we get along with one another without an emergency? I too wish we were one big happy family. But as long as you got people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, there's going to be this discrepancy. I don't know if that makes me feel fatalistic or but I just know that as long as you got somebody who's sweeping the streets and doing the garbage, someone else is going to feel as if they are better than that person. I just don't know what the answer is, unless, of course, we keep having emergencies.
Dion,
Or
do you
if
feel
we
like
paid such people better because it's an important job and recognize it as an essential job, and paid that person a decent wage, then perhaps that would help.
Oh,
Dion?
I agree with you. That's what I meant about socioeconomic. I mean, if we aren't paying them the same salary, they don't live in the same house as the person who has the education and a higher income. And I don't know how that's going to be resolved.
So Dion, what do you think we're in an emergency in this moment in history?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yes, I do believe we're in an emergency, but not of the type that makes us work together to resolve the issue. I'll try my darndest not to get into politics, but I mean, we've been torn apart over the course of the last 4 years. Nothing's being done to pull us together. If anything, that's been pulling us apart.
So what can we do? The three of you who have really devoted your life to making the world a better place and to the civil rights movement, here we are at a place today where we have a very divided nation. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's not really bringing us together. How can we achieve unity? Can we achieve unity? And this time I'm going to start with you first, Charles.
One of the things we need to do, first of all, is realize that we've got to restore our faith in organizations. Under the last 4 years, we have no faith in the FBI, the news media. All these things have been relegated to a position that, hey, there's mistrust. And where there's mistrust, there is, there's doubt. I think once we get back to basics of appreciation for American life as we used to know it, there is always room for improvement and scrutiny. But I think that once we restore faith in our organizations and including the church, that we will have a better understanding not only of ourselves, but each other. And we can, my thing is you have to have a conversation, and we got to keep the conversation going. We've got to talk because, many white people have very few Black friends and vice versa. So what we know about each other is hearsay. But once you get to talk to someone and you say, wow, we have a lot more in common than I realized. And once we realize the commonality of our existence in this country, then we can work together for success, everyone's success. Everybody wants to belong. I mean, every group that has come to this country or brought to this country, they look to belong. They do things that make them bring us together. And this longing for togetherness will always exist, because as long as we have immigrants, you're going to have people come and they want to be accepted. They want to blend in to this fabric that we have that we call America. But we have to welcome them here, help them along the rough spots, and then we can all prosper. It doesn't have to be the way it is, but it requires a little bit of giving up a little bit and accepting a little bit. And I think in the long run, we'll realize that, hey, that's a nice friend I just made today.
There's a question in the question section, and I would like to pose it to you all. Even Dr. Reverend Barber, who is the head of the People's Recovery Movement now, and sort of, some say, the legacy of picking up the Poor People's Campaign where Dr. King left off when he was assassinated. He says, conversation does not make systemic change. Policy change does. So what kinds of policy change is needed at this moment? Thank you, Elaine. Because what we're seeing is not only the desire for building community, but the desire for systemic change that has led to the frustration and the outpouring in the wake of more Black people being killed by police, more brutalization, and in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests. And these last 4 years, as you say, that we've been divided.
I
Dion,
think
do you want to?
we have to exert pressure in the right places. Those mansions out in Darien, I didn't get to go to Darien because I thought deathly sick and stayed in the Holiday Inn when you all went out there. But my image is that these are mansions, that the people who live in them don't clean and don't do the gardens. They need all kinds of people to come and make that possible. And with COVID, when you bring somebody in your house to cook and clean, you may be bringing in COVID. That should unite us. I mean, this pandemic really should bring us together because that little bug doesn't care who it affects. And the richer you are, the more likely you're to come into contact with people who are not given first in line to get the vaccination. And you have people who are really essential and pick up your trash who are not first in line to get the vaccination. So that really, I'm surprised that has not brought us together more because we really are all in the same boat in terms of that. But I think it takes pressure. It takes smart people devising policies that make things better for all of us. And then it takes community people saying, we ain't going to take it anymore. We said that with the segregated buses. We're just not going to put up with this anymore. And so it takes the policy people and the community activists, not always getting along 100%, but working together for the same objective. And we've got to be able to tell those folks in Darien that they're in the same boat with us, whether they want to be or not. They can put up all the gates they want to, but they can't keep out the fact they're a part of all of us and we're a part of them.
What can we do to not only have the kids, feel motivated to make change, but to also bring the adults into, wanting to make systematic change too and make the world better? Well, how can we bring everybody together and get something done?
We had the freedom schools in Mississippi and in Georgia and probably Alabama. And there was no age limit. It was not first grade, second grade. It was anybody who had the time to come to the freedom school. And we taught Black history. We taught government history. We taught how the system works and what a congressman does and how you get to be a county supervisor. And there were lots of adults who came, and maybe we need to actually do something on that order so that we understand how the system works. We understand how it's supposed to work and where the pressure points might be if we organize. But, I'm surprised at how many people. We just elected a member to the West Virginia legislature who put a big article in the paper saying he was glad to be a part of the Congress of West Virginia. We need to understand what the system is and how it got to be that way and how it works at its best and then how we can make it work at its best. So I think we might go back. Charles, Dion, what do you think? To volunteer freedom schools where we teach these things?
Well, one thing's for certain. We established the Freedom School in Macomb, Mississippi when the high school kids got kicked out for having organized sit-ins in Macomb. And, we taught civics, I was a physics teacher. And I think what we tried to do was instill a sense of community as what we're talking about. But, I'm listening to you guys, and I really don't know what the solution is. And I'm not certain that anyone really does. I know with the voter registration stuff, we figured one day we might have a person of color on the city council. We might have a county supervisor. Lo and behold, 50 years ago when we were doing this stuff, did we ever think in terms of mayor? Oh, I know how. Let me put it this way. When we left Jackson, there were no persons of color on the police force. There were no persons of color in any elected position. when we went back to our reunion, if you guys remember our 50th reunion, the mayor, the chief of police, the warden at the state penitentiary were all of color. We never realized that. We never realized that we'd have persons of color in the U.S. House of Representatives. So when I look back and said, you know, we laid the groundwork. So again, I keep saying this stuff is evolutionary. So to Jasper and the rest of the kids, look at what we've accomplished and take it another step. But even so, I still don't know how we're going to cross the economic divide. It's not a matter of, as Charles said, education is the key to all of this. But if you don't have opportunity, I'm not even talking about education. Let's assume you have education, but you don't have an opportunity to do anything with it. If the jobs are not available, what difference does it make? I don't have the answer, the panacea for all of these problems. And I guess because we're still fighting it, we can only inch forward. I'm not being very coherent with this, but I'm so frustrated. I guess many of us are. But this pandemic, let me tell you, you're saying that's an emergency, yes, but I don't think it's bringing us together. As you say, John, that germ doesn't discriminate. That's true, but it's keeping us behind mass, which I think we need be. But I just don't know what the answer to this problem is. And we all fight it, and once again, it's the I. When I look back and try to figure out what's going to be on my epitaph, on my grave, look, I keep thinking that my contribution amounts to a period in a book on civil rights or a comma. I guess that's just my ego. I don't know that my contribution has been that great.
You have survived to tell us the story, and that is more than we can ever ask for. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And my takeaway from this is we all got to talk to one another and know one another, and whatever our race is, wherever we come from, we got to get to know each other and not be strangers. And maybe that will help, because you're not going to hate people that you have over to dinner once we can have people over to dinner again.
One last observation on my part. I have been looking at commercials on TV, and all of a sudden I'm seeing more integrated families. And I just wonder if we're finally getting there. I don't know if we're going towards one race or one coloration, but I see progress being made. I don't know if progress is measured in terms of integration, but at least someone is talking to someone. Just an observation, off the beaten track.
I think this pandemic is really a blessing in disguise, because people who in the past have never been hungry, never been without a job, I think if they evaluate their situation and look at others, that we'll realize that all these things can happen in an instant. And I think that we appreciate, hey, go to a food line, help feed the hungry. If you got the surplus, give it away. And I think this will let all Americans know that, you may be having it easier today, and tomorrow you could be in one of those lines. And I think if we can look at each other and appreciate where we are today, but don't look down on our neighbor because they are going through an economic downturn, and work together. And I think that will help us to appreciate, because, if you've never been hungry, you can't understand a homeless person. You can't understand how someone can live on a bridge. And I know Dr. King would not be pleased with the number of people that are homeless today. There are a lot of things that before the pandemic that he would not have been pleased with, because with the surplus that America has, we should not have gone through these downturns. And now it affects so many more people. I think we can take a good look at ourselves. And I think out of this, we can find a solution.
Thank you, Charles. That's what Dr. King called policy violence, and we allow it to continue. It's not inevitable, and it's not an individual's shame. It's a public decision in policy. I know we're out of time, but I see like two questions that never got brought up. Well, one is about, can the writers comment on the January 6th insurrection? Thank you. And, you know, what about the civil rights leaders of the past being valorized, and yet the same people vehemently criticize today's Black Lives Matter leaders and other groups simply continuing the struggle for civil rights. And then I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to just, you know, kind of close with whatever comments they want to make to this captivated audience that has stayed with us the whole time.
I want to say something real quick, Anne, if I could. We haven't really talked a lot about politics. And I just think Democrats are hiding behind their politics and Republicans are hiding behind their politics. When are we going to be people? I remember when Martin Luther King and Ralph David Abernathy and many Black people were at the Republican convention, and Nelson Rockefeller was running for president. And they were right there saying that this man understands the plight of the people that we represent. I remember when they were there when Hubert Humphrey was vice president and President Johnson. You know, this political thing has gotten so bad that people are running behind that. I mean, folks are, you either watch MSNBC if you're liberal, and if you're conservative, you watch Fox News, and you take this stuff that both sides say, and it's all slanted. It is slanted. Every bit of it is slanted on both sides. I just would love to hear what our people have to say about that, because, you know, you guys were freedom riders, but you were also truth tellers. You told the truth. And I'm not seeing the politicians of the day really standing necessarily for truth. They're standing for positions. What are you thinking about this?
One of my heroes of the movement days was Mr. Whitney Young, who was head of the Urban League. And the Urban League put out something once a year that was all fact-based, was a State of the Union. And it highlighted the disparities in between education and healthcare and income and all kinds of objective, factual things. So it gave us something to start with. You know, we didn't have to say, oh, I think, you know, things are bad across the tracks. We had right here exactly how they are on both sides of the tracks. And I miss that. I wish somebody did that again, because nobody could argue with the facts. They'd show you where they got the information. And if it's Fox News or NBC, they're the facts. Now let's talk about what we do about them. And I think in the local government situation, in Jasper, in the advisory committee to the group that you're working with, if you accumulate that kind of data on a regular basis that nobody can argue with, you show them where you got it, it's reliable, then we can use that and start talking about what do we do to make these numbers better, this situation better. But if we just get our information, you know, we don't even get any news, we just get talking heads, no matter which station it is. You get about 3 facts and about 20 opinions about it. You know, honestly, I watch the Food Network and the Home Improvement Channel, you know, because even on the quote liberal media, all I get's opinions, and I have opinions. What I want to know is the facts. And tell me what it is with Medicare that's a problem, or that people think is a problem. Tell me what it is with public education funding that we need to, what do we have to do to get these schools safe for kids and teachers to go back in? Nobody tells me that. They just spout opinions. So I wish somebody would go back to something like Whitney's Young annual State of the Union, where we have facts that we can agree are true, and then we can decide what to do about it.
For those who don't know, I'm a veteran of Vietnam and also a veteran of the Civil Rights Movement. And when I joined the Marine Corps, I took an oath. When I received a commission, I took an oath, and I vowed to protect the nation, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think that my politics has been this: what's best for the country, as I see it, is where I lean. I voted for Democrats and Republicans, but like I say, my decision is based on what's best for the country and best for most of the people.
And how about Dion?
I'm in a quandary. I like you, Charles. Though I'm a registered Democrat, I'm really an independent. I vote for the person and the politics that they espouse. I would love to see. I would love to see us as a unified country. But again, with this current emergency, i.e. the disease, I think we're going to see that as a whole, our educational system is dividing us more. By that I really mean the Washington Post has recently, on its front page, shown that a disproportionate number of inoculations for this pandemic are going to the areas of town that have the highest income. Kids are staying home. They're not socializing other than, Twitter or whatever they use. I just think we're going to see when this is all over that the kids who can't afford a computer are going to end up struggling when they finally go back to school. When they start using these tests, they're going to find that people of lower income are going to do poorly compared to people who have means to buy a computer, to find. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. But this is not bringing us together. I really feel like a failure because I don't have the answers that you're looking for.
I don't think it really does. Not entirely, anyway.
Yeah.
If they did, we wouldn't have the problem.
Right.
How do you think, how can you, Jasper, as a young person, what can we do to bring our country together?
I have spent the last few years attempting to help fix some of the massive educational problems in Weston, namely what's being left out, Black history, what's being taught incorrectly. Obviously, I don't have decades of experience on this, but I believe that we can't have even remotely similar opinions as long as we're all going off of different facts. And there are, no matter what some people say when it comes to history, right? Sure, there are debates and you can include those debates, but at the end of the day, there are things that absolutely happened, right? That some things are up for dispute, some things aren't. The things that aren't up for dispute, like for example, Tulsa being burned to the ground because people were racist and 300 people being murdered. That needs to be included in public school curriculums. In 90% of schools, it's not. And there are these indisputable facts that have shaped so much of our nation that aren't being taught. And as long as people don't understand the situation, I forget who said it earlier, who was talking about how important learning history is. As long as people don't understand how we got here and what our current situation even is, how can you possibly expect them to have a coherent opinion on it? If you don't know what's going on, then you don't know
someone's interpretation.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah.
Well, you mean Jasper or me? Which one?
You, Dion, please. I didn't hear your question.
Well, it was a statement as opposed to a question in the sense that history is written by someone, it's their interpretation. It doesn't necessarily make it fact. We know that there's a huge massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But we really don't know the specifics other than, hey, houses were burned, people were lynched. That's how we get into this bit about revisionist history. When someone wrote it, someone else wrote it, someone else wrote it, and they're all different. So I guess what I'm saying to you, Jasper, even though you're saying let's teach history, well, whose text are you going to use? And is that nothing more than a biased point of view?
Well, the South's lost cause curriculum for a few decades, I'm sure the three of you are more familiar with it than I am, shaped Southern viewpoints for decades. But obviously, everything has a bias. But I do believe that it's possible to get close to objectivity. You're never going to get completely there, but if you have groups of people with different viewpoints that come together, they discuss it, you can find a common ground. And there are so many things that, like I said, you can't dispute that a massacre happened. That is not up for debate. And even that much isn't included in so many textbooks. And there are so many things that are like completely ignoring interpretations. There aren't even a few words about so many incredibly integral events in American history. And yeah.
And how about the attack on America, as Sarah had brought up? I mean, we could be here for another couple of hours, but certainly that was a divisive, terrible thing that just happened in our nation. And how can we come together after something like that? How can we prevent something like that from happening again?
Well, those are two different questions. I'm not ready to come together with people who want to assassinate the leaders of the country. I don't think that I'm prepared to invite them over for dinner. So I think we have to, that we had a cry, Charles and Dion, no justice, no peace. We have to start in those kinds of circumstances, and in police who misuse their authority, with justice. We have to prove that we can render justice when things have been done so wrongly. But for the people who didn't storm the Capitol and didn't kill people and didn't want to kill other people, I'm struggling with that too, because I live in a county that 2/3 of the people here voted for a second term for what I saw as 4 years of disaster. And so I'm trying to figure out, and I know these people, I've known them for 40-something years. I don't understand how they came to that conclusion, and I don't know honestly how they and I can have dinner together if we ever get over COVID and talk about it. I don't know that I want to know. I mean, it strikes me as something that's just, I don't know. I just don't know how to do that conversation.
Once again, Joan, we're still in agreement.
I want to be so respectful and mindful of everybody's time. We're a little bit over, but I want Devin, you to be able to share some of the upcoming events as we sort of continue the conversation across the community and offer forums like this, which are so powerful. And so it can be life-changing for people to really get a chance to participate in. And I also just want to quickly thank the House Democrats of the General Assembly for loaning us their Zoom forum.
Great, thank you, Anne, and thank you. I have to say to each, to Jasper and to Nancy and Anne for, asking questions, Wiley for bringing this Freedom Riders twice to Easton, Reading, and Weston, and also to, for helping us plan additional events, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then to Joan, to Dion, and to Charles. There's like not enough words to really express my gratitude for making time, Dion for making it work even without Zoom. I can't, we tried for an hour, but we got you on. You guys have given me a lot of hope.
Show us his picture. Show us the picture.
Oh, let's see if I can find it. You've definitely given me a lot of hope around and I think ideas and how we can continue the conversation, continue to, make a difference. I don't have Dion's picture really handy, but I do want to share in the chat, I put a feedback. Oh yes, Joan has it. There you go. Thank you, Joan. I appreciate that.
We can't see it at the moment because you're
Oh,
sharing your.
Okay, hold on. Joan, go ahead. So everybody can see Dion.
No,
There you go.
And we would request photos of all of our panelists, and we will put them in the Easton Courier.
And this is Nancy's photo from 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a couple events coming up. If you click on the link that I put in the chat, we'd love to hear what you thought of this event. We have a conversation with Lisa McNair, who is the sister of one of the young girls killed in the 16th Street bombing in September of 1963. She's going to share really how her and her family have survived such a hateful crime. And really, she speaks so much about love and how that has got her through and how she continues to work through hope and change. We also have an event, James Baldwin Out Loud, being hosted by the James Baldwin Society on March 7th. And so if you sign up, we will make sure that you're on our emailing list so you can hear more about all these great events. But for now, please join me in thanking our amazing panelists. Special thank you again to Joan, Dion, and Charles. We really appreciate your time. To Wiley for making this happen again the second time, to Nancy for being an amazing moderator, for Anne for getting the House Dims to let us use their Zoom space, and for Jasper for joining and bringing a voice from the student perspective. You're all appreciated, and have a great night. Stay well, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Deb.
Thank you, guys.
You.
For organize this, and Sarah. All of
Thank
you.
you.
question.
Yeah.
Okay, Wiley, you know how to find everybody, yes?
I know how to find you all, and I will personally give everybody a call tomorrow just to debrief with you. But thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. This
And-
has been
and
such a
it's
treat.
great. And I also want to say,